Coming up, I have an older Yamaha Dolby digital receiver that was brought in with a couple problems. One, the convenience outlet doesn't work. Two, the remote control has a problem. And three, a complaint that the display is dim. Let's check it out. This is the Yamaha RAV1400 receiver. This is an older Dolby DTS receiver. Dolby, I think it's Dolby digital, but no HDMI on this. This is a little bit too old for that. It has component switching on it, and this one has a couple problems, a couple complaints. One of them is that the display is dim, which it is. It could be dirty. It could be the glass is dirty. Yeah, let's just put an antenna on it. See if I can pull in any of the local stations. So with an external antenna, so the receiver is working. The complaint on this is that the display is very dim, and it is, and it goes even dimmer. This one has a brightness adjustment control. If I adjust the volume, you see it gets a bit brighter, but it looks like, and it'll dim out. It looks like the display itself, the back of the display might be dirty. I don't know if it came from a smoky environment or what it came from, but we'll check that out. But it is very dim. It does adjust brightness, so when you make adjustments, it brightens up. So the auto dimming is probably turned on, and I'm sure that the auto dimming can be controlled by a setting on the remote control or a setting through the menu. Okay, one of the complaints the unit was brought in for was the convenience outlets on the back are not outputting any voltage, and that is true. I'm getting 2.4 volts when the unit's on. That was the major complaint when it was brought in. So the good chance what's happened on this is that the unit was overloaded, the convenience outputs were overloaded, and either a trace has been burned off the board or the relay's burned out, or maybe we'll get lucky and it's fused. But let's pull the top off and see why the convenience outlets are not working, and then I'll take a look at that display. Anything obvious. But the real reason it was brought in was to check it over and to check the convenience outlets on the back. As I say, chances are it's been overloaded at some point, and that's why they're not working. Of course, we go from one extreme to another. Some of the amps we've looked at lately look to be relatively empty inside, but that's not the case with the Yamaha. The Yamaha have the output transistors mounted in the middle here with couple big heat sinks, and probably the main channels are up here, and this is going to be like the surround and the rear channels, I believe. And everything's got a big fan on it. There's also a big power supply over here with a plastic barrier over it. No, that's not to protect the transformer from anything touching it. That's actually to create airflow, so that the air is drawn around the transformer and then through the fan and blown over top of the heat sink and then out. So the air is drawn in one side. The vents on here are on the top and on the sides. If we look at the unit itself, we'll see it's got vents on the left cover, so the air gets drawn in here. Air gets drawn in also, we come out through the top here, so it can be drawn past the power transformer. There's a barrier here, so all the air has to be drawn in from the side. So all the air goes over the transformer, through the fan, over the heat sink, and then out here where the air can then radiate out, and it can't exit on the right side. See, this is the back, has screws in it, so it goes on like that. So all the ventilation, air is drawn in, blown through the heat sinks, and then exits out here. And there's a deflector here to force the air to come up, so the air can come up and then actually go over top of the heatsink again as it's radiating out and exiting from the top of the unit. So first we'll check the front display on this one. As I say, there wasn't a complaint made for the actual operation of the unit. It does work, so I'm not going to go to all the trouble of pulling out the boards just to inspect connections on the bottom of it, because this unit does not have a service hatch. The only way to actually work on the amplifier boards is you actually have to remove them, and that's a huge job and a big expense, which the owner of this won't want to go to just to look at it. So say he brought it to me to check the output, or check the convenience outputs on this, and these ones are fused. I'm sure I'm going to find that it has a blown fuse, and we're going to check the display out and see what's causing the display to be dim. Is it the display itself, or is it just that the glass on the front panel has been contaminated with something which is dimming it out? So we'll take the front panel off and we'll take a look at that. First things first though, let's check to see if there's a blown fuse, because I'm assuming that it probably is just a fuse that is popped for the convenience outlets, as I'm pretty sure that this unit has such a fuse. So let's check the fuses here. This one here is indeed open. So we'll take this fuse out and see that yes, this fuse is blown. We're going to have to replace that fuse. It's probably like a 1 amp fuse, because it says the maximum output on this is 100 watts. So I'm betting that they put a 1 amp fuse in here, or 1.5 amp, or well, the output on the back, it says 100 watts maximum. This is a 10 amp fuse. I thought I was seeing things when I first looked at it. I thought, well, it can't be a 0.1, but nope, it's a 10 amp fuse that blew. So obviously something was on there that was drawing a lot of current. I'll have to try and find a big fuse like that for the output, convenience outlets on the back. So we'll replace the fuse, and we have (117 volts) switched. So that was just a blown fuse that was causing that. And it's a 10 amp fuse of all things. It is definitely a 10 amp fuse. I always thought I was seeing things, but on the board it's listed as a 10 amp fuse, and that was in there, even though the convenience outlets on the back say 1 amp maximum. 100 watts, actually it says 100 watts, 0.8 amps maximum, but they're using a 10 amp fuse to protect those plugs. That was from the factory, as that's what the original fuse was rated. So we'll pull the front panel off now, just so I can check the display, and then he wants me to check the remote control. And those are basically the three things that I was asked to check on this unit. It's another amplifier that's going to be used in a garage, for a garage sound system. He asked me, it's a little bit overkill for a garage, but what do I know, right? I remember we used to service these, and I didn't service them, my audio guy did, and he would curse every time he got one, and he would curse because he would spend so much time tearing it down to get to something, right? Just to get to anything on the board. He had spent so much time just to get into anything. He hated them because of the way that Yamaha were laid out. Not just this, all of the Yamaha. They were one of the first to go away from having the hatch on the bottom. So we used to hate working on Yamaha for that reason. And then the customers used to hate the bill they got, because the bill was considerably higher because of the amount of time taken to tear it down to get to anything. Okay, first, once the screws are removed, the front bezel will come off. Put that out of the way so it doesn't get damaged. And then I have to take the display comes off as a separate unit. I'll pull the front panel off on this thing, another pain in the butt, just to check in behind the display to see whether possibly the display itself is dim due to it being dirty. The back of the display here could be that the indicator tube is going bad too, which is always a possibility. There should be a couple of screws I got to take out here to remove this front panel. One on each side, I believe, and then the whole panel should lift off. I got the screws out from the bottom, a couple more on the front and on the top here. So the top corner, and on the other side. fold that one down so that I can get to the screw in behind this panel. And then there should be a couple more down the side to hold it in place. Front panel will lift off. It lifts off complete with the board. I gotta unplug it. It unplugs right here. It's one plug. And then there should be a couple more. There's another plug over here. That has to come out, and a couple more. But I don't need to take this all out. I just want to be able to. I want to be able to loosen off the front board, so I can separate the board. That way I can check it out. We'll just release this clip like that, and now I should be able to take out the screws that hold this front board in place. I got to take this out as well. A lot of work. As you can see, these are a lot of work to get to. We'll undo this connector at the front here. And the other one down here, the bottom one, and there should be one more here to come out, and a couple more plugs, that one and this one. Now I can lift the front panel away, and we can check this out, see whether the reason the display is dim is because there's dirt between the display and the back of the lens. And how would dirt get there? Well, from convection, from air traveling up, especially if it was used in a contaminated environment. If that's not the case, then it's probably the display tube itself is getting dim, and there's not a lot that one can do about that. Could be voltages too, but that's not real common on these units. And one more. You can hear the filament wires singing on the display tube here when I kind of tapped it there a bit. And it should lift out what's holding it up now. The knob. You know what? I gotta undo this. I gotta take out this encoder. There's a nut there I gotta take off for the input select. I think that was the input select. Okay, now it should lift off like that. Okay, and so there is a bit of a film on the inside of the display glass here. If you notice when I wipe it with my finger, you see there is a film on the inside there. How much that's impeding the display? Well, let's see here. You just shine a light through it and see that it is, well, it is noticeable, that's for sure. Probably not affecting it much, just clouding it a bit, but the lens itself, it is noticeable when I put a light through it. So we'll just kind of clean this up. Whether that's going to make much of a difference, I doubt it. It's probably the display tube itself is getting a little bit on the weak side. The actual filter on here was equally dusty, which has now been cleaned off. I'm just going to reflow the connections on the display panel itself. Some of them look kind of a bit dull. Could just be the lead-free solder that they used at the factory. I think a lot of it's got to do with the fact that they use lead-free. This stuff just terrible. It always looks like it's a cold solder when it's not, because it has such a dull appearance to it compared to when you use leaded solder, which tends to look nice and shiny. These ones always look dull. But it won't hurt to reflow it, especially the filament leads, as you get a cold connection on the filament, and the filament voltage will drop off a bit, which will of course heat the cathode less and result in less emission. It's also a capacitor here in the circuit for the cathode. It might not hurt to check that. It's right here on the back side of the board. The thing is, vacuum fluorescent displays, they do over time get dim. There's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way they are. They are a vacuum tube, and the emission from the heated cathode over time will diminish. So there's not a lot you can do when they get to that point. If the tube itself is getting weak, there's not a lot you can do. Some people will crank up the voltage on the filament to make the filaments run hotter, which will of course make it work for a little bit longer, like the old CRT boosters. People would put a Radio Shack sold them for the days of the picture tube. And basically it was just a transformer that increased the voltage to the filaments on the CRT. And that worked fine in the days, the tube TV days, when the filaments were powered up from a separate winding on the power transformer that all the tubes were fed with. You know, typically it was 6.3 volts, and the transformer would increase it from 6.3 to maybe 8 volts. That was a way of extending the life of your picture tube a little. But that stopped working when the manufacturers, when they went to solid state TVs, and the winding for the filament was generated by the flyback transformer. So the little brighteners that Radio Shack sold, well, they were designed to work on 60 hertz, not 15.7 kilohertz. So it didn't work. And they would actually, if someone plugged one in, usually it would shut the TV down because it would be detected, cause ringing on the flyback transformer, which would usually cause one of the other voltages to be wonky and trip the X-ray protection, and then the set would shut down. Oh yeah, let's just check this little 330 microfarad cap. We'll just check it for ESR and check it for shorts and stuff. I'll just remove it from the board or pull one leg from it. Yeah, that cap tests good. Measures 331 microfarads, and the ESR tested at 0.2, which is perfectly acceptable. So there's no problem with the that cap. So we'll reseat the board. Reattach the bracket. All this just to check the display. Watch me have to take it all apart again to get to the infrared sensor, because watch the infrared sensor be no good. He did say it had a remote problem. Hopefully it's the remote and not the sensor. But then the guy that owned it said, well, the volume control doesn't seem to work because it's got a motorized volume control and it's not turning. Well, it's actually not a motorized volume control. It's actually a it's an encoder. It's an electronic volume control on this one. Okay, we'll reconnect the various connectors. They're all keyed. So this one's a 3-pin and this one's a 4-pin. So you can't mix them up. Get the connectors plugged in. This is the one for power. Plugs into the power supply. That's what brings the power over to the display board. So there's a larger and a smaller that will only fit into the appropriate connector on the sideboard here. So these are not my favorite type of connectors, because if you don't have these lined up properly and you push them into the connector and you're off, you're not straight, you can cause the foil to peel off and ruin the connector. So you got to make sure that it's straight when you insert it. Going to put a couple of the screws back in to hold the front cabinet on, and then we'll power the unit up and see whether the display is improved now that it's been cleaned. It certainly should be clearer, because it did have quite a film on the inside of the glass. Plug the power connector back in. Okay, and I'll try it out. And of course it's still quite dim, and I think it's the display itself. You know, I'll show you guys why I think it's the display. It's the phosphorus that's burning on the display. You'll see. I'll turn out the light so you guys can see it better. You see what I mean? If we look at the display, we can see some of the segments are brighter than others. So I get the suspicion that the reason why is because the phosphorus itself is burning on the display. It also dims. See, it brightens up when you adjust it, but it will go to a dimmer display, and it dims down. But you can see that there are some segments, or some are brighter than others. And that's just the display tube itself, I'm afraid. You can see the brightness changing. And you can also see even over here, well, I guess you guys can't see it because it's off angle, but like for example, VCR1 is dimmer, so obviously the red underscore for VCR1 is dimmer than some of the other ones. If I lift this up a bit, maybe you guys can see it. But it's got a red line that underscores, and it's dimmer on the ones that were used more often. Like CDR is bright compared to DVD, and CD is brighter over here. Tuner is dim, phono is, you know, so the display tube itself, as we can see by looking at the different segments, the dots for forming different words, you can see which ones have been used more. Oops. You never want to hear oops, right? Okay, that goes on like that. And then the front face, which in this unit is almost in immaculate condition. Look at that. Beautiful, huh? That just slips on the front like that, held in place with a couple screws on the top and the bottom, and then we'll deal with the remote control, see if I can make that remote operate a little bit better than it has been. So as we can see, the remote works, but I have to really push quite hard. So we'll take this one apart. And see if the rubber keypad can be fixed up. This is a learning remote, this one. I believe it's a learning remote. Yeah, this is a learning remote on here. Okay, so this one's got a screw that holds it together. Should pop apart now. There should be clips as well around the edge, which I can pop apart. So we just carefully work the clips open, and they should pop open. There we go. Like that. All right, what do we got in here? Oh, yeah, there's something sticky. I can feel it. So we're gonna wash this off. I'll wash the rubber keypad off with soap and water, and I'll just use some just regular water. I think probably maybe some distilled water, but there certainly is something sticky. I can feel it. You can see it on the board right down here. You see it? Something sticky there. These ones are okay. It's just the volume. The rest of them are fine. But when I get to the volume, there's something sticky right there. So it's really only gotten, something must have been spilled on this. And you can see it. If you look right here, you can see it, right? So let's go clean up the volume control. I'll clean up the pads. And we'll clean up this, and I'll just do this with the Q-tip with some water. That's all I'm going to need to do to clean this one up. So I'm just using pure water, and we're going to clean up the board, and this will wash off the whatever is sticky on here. It's obviously sugar of some type, coffee, juice, something spilled on here. And dry the board. We'll do the same for the rubber keypad. Hopefully the carbon on here is not damaged, which quite often happens. But we'll wash this, and I'm going to let this air dry for a bit before putting it back together. I'm also going to use isopropanol on here to dissolve anything that's not sugar based, so that'll clean up anything that's left behind that's not sugar based, like oil based for example, will get picked up by, or I should say will be dissolved by isopropanol. And then we use the water side to wash it clear. And then we'll use some compressed air to dry this off. Just peel this out of here. Oh yeah, this is wet on this side from me cleaning it, but we're going to use compressed air to dry this off. The keypad back in place. I'll check it for conductivity using my meter. So a good pad will give me, that's 4K ohms. Here's the one that I repaired. So a little bit higher, isn't it? But it's got conductivity, that's for sure. We'll see how hard the button has to be pressed. Certainly the carbon has been damaged here a bit for sure, but at least it's not sticky anymore. Okay, before I put it together, I got to make sure that all the components line up, like the little indicator that indicates it's transmitting. If we look on the back of this board, you'll see how this is designed with 2 chips on the actual board itself, where they've encapsulated 2 of the chips right on the board. Looks like at one point this one was a surface mounted, but they made it an encapsulated. We've got a surface mounted chip here, an encapsulated chip here, so obviously there's no repairing these boards. This would be for the display, I'm sure. This is the display driver because it's right behind the display. Anyway, we want to make sure that the alignment is correct. So when I put the board in place, I want to make sure that the little transmit light is on the front, which it is. So now I can just snap the remote. Oh, I got to put the window back in here. Slide the window down into its space and line up the battery cover with the terminals, and the remote should just snap together. Just like that. Put the screw in and reload the batteries and test it out. See if I've made any improvement to the operation of the remote. It was working before. It's just that you had to really press hard to get the volume buttons to activate. So what I'm hoping is that it won't require such a heavy hand to operate it. So tuner, oh yes, much better. Yeah, much better. Before I really had to press hard, and now I just have to barely press on it at all. That one cycles through the different modes. TV power. Okay, this one should turn it off. There, that one turns it off there. System power off and system power on. I don't know what these buttons are for, but I know I can select the inputs here. Input phono tuner, CD, multi-channel in, VAUX, and the amp is saying the same thing here. DVR, tuner, DVD. Does it change on here or not? Probably doesn't change on this. Anyway, the remote's working a lot better than it was. I'm going to call it a day. That's what it was brought in for, was to get the remote fixed and to fix that problem with the power outlet, the convenience outlet, which turns out that it was just a blown fuse, so obviously it was overloaded. So that's it, a natural sound Yamaha AV receiver RAV1400. It's a nice unit. These are great units. If you can find one of these on the cheap, they're worthwhile buying, because Yamaha did make good units. This one here just has your standard analog inputs. It does not have HDMI, so it's kind of limited as far as a home theater unit these days. So this unit had your front speakers, A and B, surround and surround rear, and second zone and center channel. Digital inputs, coaxial and optical, and of course your analog inputs. Composite video, S video, and of course it had two sets of component inputs and one component output. So this was good in the days before we needed HDMI for everything. As an AV receiver for DVD, no problem. You wouldn't be hooking a Blu-ray up, or if you were, you're not going to be hooking the video up through here. You'll just be taking the sound through it. But as a stereo amplifier for stereo audio, these are great units. And because they are kind of limited now as far as using them as a home theater system, because they don't have any HDMI inputs, they actually can be got for a pretty good bargain.
So this has a dimmer on it, and the dimmer was set to dim the display after you made an adjustment. It's done through the on-screen. You use the remote control and a TV to set it up. I've now turned the dimmer off so it doesn't dim down, and it's readable. I mean, I've got lights on in here. I don't have all the studio lights on, but I have my garage lights on, so it is relatively bright in here, and the display is now readable. And it doesn't, I don't have the speakers hooked up to it now, but it doesn't dim down like it did before. It's still got some segments that are brighter than others, and again, it's either the display itself. I'm sure the display is weak, or the drive IC that drives that multiplex display. But definitely, it's not as bright as it should be. But it's readable now with the lights on, whereas before, if the lights were on and it went to that dim state, you couldn't even see it. And that dim feature is there. People use these in their home theater, and they might have them next to their TV or whatever, and they don't necessarily want to see the display on while they're watching TV. So they have it so you can dim it down or actually turn it right off. Anyway, thanks for watching.